Hi, Laurie.
Hi. Good
Welcome to
morning.
getting to know me.
Oh, no, you're in good company.
One of the most beautiful things about understanding that I'm autistic, as well as a whole bunch of other things. I'm like the poster child for neurodivergence. I'm one of each. But understanding that I'm autistic, I now don't like try to hide the facts of me that I've been bullied about my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, Don Marie, like, why are you always 10 minutes early to a meeting? It's like, because if I don't get used to the room before you people get here, I won't be able to stay.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
And what I would tell you, it's because I can be early or I can be late. We pick
right,
one.
right. That is also truth. That
Because I can't feel time move in my body. And if I think I have extra time, oh, I have plenty of time. I'll dick around a little. And and then it'll just be like, oh wait, 3 hours passed. How'd that happen? And now I'm really late. And so no, I don't have time to just, if I have to do a thing, I gotta plan it so that I'm gonna end up sitting there twiddling my thumbs and be really early. Otherwise, I'm late. It's just the way it
uh-huh.
is. Radical acceptance. This is like what you're saying. One of the lovely things about neurodiversity and there being more talk about it and us trying to create safer spaces for people to talk about like how we're all just naturally put together is radical acceptance. When I just embrace, well, this is just how I'm put together. So I've built workarounds for myself, or I will ask you for certain things and I'm not embarrassed about it. This is what you get and this is how I work. So it's a much kinder, gentler, nicer world when we can do that.
And this is why the recording button was pushed before you entered the meeting, because this always happens. Right?
We get
Whoever I'm
right
talking
into
to,
it.
we talk about really cool stuff before we formally start. I'm like, well, I
Yeah.
don't want to cut that out.
Ah. Oh, and fair warning, since it is recorded and you're capable of editing, yes. My dogs, I lock them upstairs in a bedroom with bones and treats. And if the post guy comes or hopefully we're good. But you might hear barking at some point.
So my dogs are just on the other side of the door, and they bark at everything inside the house as well. My
Mhm.
oldest dog uh, is half basset hound, and she does
Mhm.
the hound screaming. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Yeah.
like hounds bark for sure, but they also have this like screaming thing that they do. So every time you leave the room and come back, Molly's so happy to see you, she has to scream about it. And
Aroo.
the
Yep.
whole house is sensory challenged. And so we love this dog, we truly do, but oh my, every time you come back into the room,
Yep.
every time you'd be gone for 30 seconds. And in her brain,
Mhm.
it's like dogs are the kings and queens of time blindness, right?
Uh-huh.
Either
Uh-huh.
now or forever. She is so excited and surprised that you actually returned,
Yeah. No, I get it.
which gets the other two dogs going. So two of my adult children live with us, and if they show up like for breakfast or whatever while we're recording, we will definitely hear about it.
Well, then I'm in good company.
You are. You're in good company. And that's a huge piece of why I do these recordings.
Mhm.
Reality, right? I
Yeah.
just want I just
Real
want to
life.
live in a real world. I always have. My poor mother, who's very creative and imaginative, received a child. I am creative, but not necessarily imaginative. Like I'm not like other autistic people in that I'm like, I don't enjoy cosplay. I don't like, I was in theater for a while. I was evidently kind of good at it. People expected me to go do that. I didn't enjoy pretending to be other people,
Mhm.
especially if audience members didn't quite understand that character up there was not me. I played the
Yeah.
mom in Equus. I don't know if you're familiar with that play or if people watching are familiar with that play, but she's not a nice person. Not a nice person. And presents herself in a very particular stereotypical religious way. And I had members of the audience come up to me and just like, that thing that you said. It's just like, I didn't say that, sweetie. That
Not
wasn't
me.
my lines. I don't think that at all. And it really scares me that you thought that was a good thing to say. So I left
Oh,
it. I'm like, I don't ever want to pretend again. But as autistic people and otherwise neurodivergent people, we're often asked to pretend to act for the comfort of others as something
mhm.
that is not ourselves. And I'm trying really hard to refuse.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want to
And
do it.
that's like I said, that's really the heart of it, right? The crux of, the whole idea of neurodiversity and why that's becoming something that we're going to drag into the mainstream and get people to start being more comfortable with. Because it's so nice not to have to pretend, that you can do certain things that don't come naturally, or that things don't bother you that do. I've gotten to a place now in life where, my family's we'll go out to dinner and everybody knows I'm gonna sit next to a wall. I that this is a requirement. Like, no, I'm not
Don't
gonna sit
block
out in the
my
middle of
view
some
to
restaurant
the
with, like, people read, "Laurie gets the space in the corner, like, by the wall with a solid wall behind me," because auditorily, I can't filter out the rest of the restaurant. It makes me really uncomfortable. I can't have a good time. I can't enjoy myself in that setting if I've also got all kinds of stuff going on behind me. I have a lot of sensory reasons why that would be uncomfortable, but the one that makes it most impossible is the auditory. So just not being able to screen things out. So it's easier for me if I can just sit in a corner, and everyone's cool with that. Everyone's like, "That's just a Laurie thing. Laurie gets that seat."
That's nice. And I hope they would defend it with their lives.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You may not sit there and we will remove you bodily.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and
the kind
it's
of
just
friend
become
I
one of those
want.
things where that it's not weird, it's not, being picky, it's not anything, it's just this is just how I'm put together, and if you want me to be able to have a decent conversation with you at a dinner table, then this is a requirement. That's all, and it's cool, it's fine. Radical acceptance, you know?
Laurie, I want to introduce you before, like, I'm sure if people have watched
Before
this
we
far,
completely forget that part.
people have watched this far. I mean, I think they'll be able to see your name down here in the corner, but I want people to know who you are.
Yeah.
And my brain has already shattered into about a bazillion pieces. So I'm actually ask you to do the bulk of introducing, because I
That's
mean, like,
okay.
especially since the traumatic brain injury, I so quickly it it's literally a physical feeling. I can feel my capacity for memory and words drain from my being. And
Oh,
so I've learned I have to honor my capacity.
mhm.
And if I have to work too hard to remember a thing, I may time out before we've actually had a conversation. So if it's okay with you,
Yeah,
instead of trying to pull all that from my memory, um,
totally fine.
yeah. So the floor is yours. The camera is yours.
So who am I? I'm a very webby, um, okay, who am I? Laurie. Laurie is a trauma therapist primarily right now. So I work in private practice. I'm also a social worker. And I like to think in terms of webbiness and systems, and social work was not my first love professionally. It was psychology. But then I found social work was the better fit. And so I moved over into that realm, but still had a passion for, I like to work with people one on one, where I can control the environment. In my private practice, I'm able to control things like lighting and textures and sounds and things. And these things help me focus and feel more comfortable. And I've realized I can extend that to my clients too and help them learn how they're put together and how to create situations in which they're able to perform at their best, right? Um, it's a long story how I ended up becoming a trauma therapist. I don't know if we want to do that today, but I love it. I'm an EMDR provider and consultant, which means I help other therapists get better at EMDR therapy, which is a trauma therapy. I'm very interested in all things sensory because I have sensory sensitivities. It's an area I've explored a lot. I'm very interested in child development. I started my career as a child therapist, and now I see everyone. And I love working with the entire age range because I get to see how things play out. So, about half my caseload are generally complex developmental trauma. So, kids who have experienced difficult things, often with neurodiversity as part of the mix. So, having a different way of taking in events that have happened, and having those events happen while you're developing yourself as a human, right? Going through your developmental milestones. It's different when something happens when you're 5 versus when you're 13 or 23, right? So that's all very interesting to me. So there's a lot of play and creativity and art and sensory and things incorporated in that. And about the other half of my caseload are the adults who I wish had gotten me as a child therapist, who are all grown up now and are trying to unpack and understand themselves and the things that happened when they were much younger. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And then in the last few years, I've come out of my very comfy, secure little private practice where I feel very cozy. I'm a bit of an introvert, very social, but I'm an introvert. I really recharge by being alone, and in smaller spaces. I don't like parties for more than about 20 minutes. I love them for about 20 minutes. So now I'm kind of coming out of my shell a little bit and going on podcasts and doing workshops and trying to connect and teach and share some of the things that I've learned. You know, it's been a little over 20 years. So it's kind of a give back kind of period of my career is kind of what I'm moving into. And I
I love
discovered the
that.
Neurodiversity Network and you, and I was like so excited. I'm making new friends. And I thought this will be really cool. I'll get to know more people. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I have been the same my entire life. Like I think back to like school dances and things like that, and about 10 minutes in, I'd be like, I need to leave right now. And I didn't understand because I didn't know until I was about 50 years old that I'm autistic and ADHD and a bunch of other things. Um, but I think when you have a passion to help others, there comes a point where it may become personally motivating, right? We get something sort of birthed inside of us where, okay, it's really uncomfortable and not my favorite thing to be out with all the people, but I got a thing to say, and I think the thing I have to say might help. And so I'm going to do that. And I think that creates an opportunity for a tremendous amount of learning that can also be shared, right? What does it look like to honor your energy clock, so to speak, right? You've got a timer on your energy. This, like the second you wake up, that timer starts, right? That little stopwatch starts, and the energy is gonna, right? And depending on what happens in the day, your energy timer might click off at 10 o'clock a.m., right?
Yeah.
And
That's
it
why
actually
it's so
might start
important
up
to know
again at 10
yourself well.
p.m.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right. We have these weird little energy clocks, energy meters, that we have to be willing to honor. And traditional work
Isn't always a
really
fit.
pushes back against that, you know, we have
Yeah.
to be robot-like in our how much time we are working, what hours of the day we are working, at what we are working, and for what.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's very, very difficult for a lot of us neurodivergent folks is purpose and passion have to kind of be baked in, or our brain and body rebel hardcore.
Yeah.
We can feel emotionally unwell, physically unwell, exhausted. It's really, really unhealthy for us to be in environments that aren't some version of purpose and passion infused. But we don't always get good support for that. And
there often really just isn't encouragement in that direction.
Right.
You know, one of my favorite groups of folks to work with are young adults who are trying to figure out how to go adult in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the fun things I get to do is be one of those adults who says, you know, self-employment's an option, right? You know, some of us do much better just not having an employer. And there are ways to do that. You know, I work in private practice. I'm self-employed. I know how I work best, right? I put in some crazy long hours, 3 days a week. And the alternate 2 days are much more low key and way more flexible. I get really, really hyper focused and very into my purpose and passion. And I can do that for a lot of hours with very minimal breaks. But then the next day has to be completely different, you know, and that's me. That wouldn't work for everybody. You know, I talk to other therapists about how they do their schedules, and we all look at each other like we're all kind of off our rockers because we all do things differently, and that's a good thing. And, you know, and then I've got a salon owner who's shares the building that I'm in. And she's created a whole life for herself, starting a salon and the way that her life works and how her energy clock runs, right? So being able to be in that space of influencing young adults to, you don't just need to go get the job and put your nose to the grindstone and put up with a 9 to 5, you get 2 weeks of vacation. You must be sitting in a desk in front of a computer in order to be an adult. And it's like, yeah, no, there's lots of ways to make a living, to be an adult, to work your passion and your purpose into a way to sustain yourself. There's so many ways to do this.
And some people, some autistic people, some otherwise neurodivergent people actually do incredibly well with like the 9 to 5 and things that are easily repeated and standardized and stuff like that. And that's beautiful if that works for you. But if it doesn't, the harm we do to ourselves by trying to force that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one of the things I'm trying to do in my advocacy is help parents and employers understand there are many, many ways to be productive and successful. We just need to be open to figuring it out. And that can be very hard, right? So I am a business owner, and if I'm very used to my way of doing things, it may be very hard for me to say, okay, I'll work with an employee who does things very differently from me. That might be a huge mental and emotional undertaking. It also might be really, really worth it.
Yeah.
Right? I have to know myself. I might not be able to do that, and that's valid as well, right? If I very much need for my physical and emotional well-being for things to work kind of the way I've set them up and all of that, That's valid.
Yeah.
But for those of us who can offer a little bit of flexibility, what ways in which are there to be very unique and creative with
Mhm.
who's doing what, when, what they're doing? Can we swap jobs for the day, right? Maybe I have brain space for something else that isn't technically my job, but that's what I have brain space for today. A flexible work environment might say, okay, Dawn Marie, we've got these things that need doing over in that space, have at it, right? Or you could sit in on this meeting and offer your creative thoughts, or, right? When we're flexible, really cool things have possibility.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that's very hard. We are asking people to be flexible, to be open-minded. And for some of us, that is close to or sincerely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to make room for that brain as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably a really good moment to turn back to the fact that you are helping folks with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I refer to myself as a trauma baby. I've had trauma since like day one. Ta-da! Here I am. I've made the joke that I break therapists. They basically can't get past when I was like 5 or 6 years old because they're like, no, that's too much, right? You should be in much
There's no
better shape
such
than
thing
you
as
are.
too much. Yeah.
And so again, before I understood I was neurodivergent,
Yeah.
I did know I was a different learner. And
Mm-hmm.
my college time was devoted to understanding different learning modalities, different ways of being a brain.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma literally rewires your brain,
Yep.
right? If it's persistent, it means your little internal operator took a wire that was supposed to go to Joe and has sent it to Tom, and you don't want to talk to Tom right now. But your brain's like, no,
Yeah.
not like that trauma thing
The
told me you want
expression
to talk to Tom,
is if
right?
it fires together, it wires together. Right. So I often tell people it's sort of like a bike path in your brain. Like you may get used to having this concrete highway because this is the way things got put together. I'm like, it's not impossible. If you ever seen The Walking Dead, that awful show with the zombies, you see how quickly nature reclaims all that pavement, right? If you're able to start a new bike path, at first you can't even see it in the grass, but with continued use, you can wear in a new path and you can eventually get it so it is very clear and it's easier to choose. Right.
Yeah.
So neuroplasticity is real. We are capable of rewiring. That's one of the things I love about trauma therapy. It's very empowering. It's very hopeful. Um, Dr. Karyn Purvis, who was one of my early inspirations in trauma work, she used to say, the good news is the bad news, and the bad news is the good news. The bad news is it is incredibly easy to damage a developing mind with trauma. It's also not impossible to repair, because of that plasticity, because we are capable of healing, of rewiring with the right kinds of support, with the right understanding, with the right connections between mind and body working together. Healing is possible. It doesn't mean that you won't have scars. I'm kind of proud of mine. They say I've lived. But we don't have to be walking around with a wound like still open and unhealed forever, no matter how much has happened. No one is too complicated. And it really is up to this part why I'm passionate about therapists becoming more in tune with neurodiversity, is because it is a therapist's job to pivot, to not rely just on their own style of thinking or their own frame of reference, but to, almost like a chameleon, adapt, to the person in front of you, see the need, meet that person where they're coming from, and figure it out, how to support natural reweaving and healing. So yeah, no one's too complicated.
I agree. My guess is that there are many, many neurodivergent people who are therapists.
Probably yes.
I kind of feel
Whoever
like
hung out with us.
because we have to start figuring out the world in such a unique way from word one, right? From minute one, we spend an enormous amount of our time figuring out fellow humans. And we would like it all to work a little more functionally.
Uh-huh.
I remember being very tiny, I believe younger than 3, standing knee-high to my parents and my older brother, listening to them argue with each other and recognizing it was the words they were using, not the perspectives they were holding. And trying with my limited vocabulary and tiny self to say, no, you're not disagreeing, you're misunderstanding. And of course, when you're that little, no one's listening to you, right? And I would get very upset, very emotional because they weren't listening. And when I felt like I could fix it, right? So I grew up sitting on the edge of my bed. You could hear everything that happened in my house, the way my house was designed. I would sit on the edge of my bed, and instead of trying to insert myself into these conversations and arguments, I would just study them. And I would listen for, when did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? And I like internalized all of that. And it became one, now we understand that's a trauma response, right? Always on the lookout for how I might go wrong. But also a really enjoyable passion of mine to understand how people are communicating, where it goes sideways, and how we can repair that, right? How can we be more in relational understanding than in relational divide? And I think that's one of the things that motivated me into education originally, and then into coaching and consulting, was I wanted to help people understand themselves and each other so that supportive, cooperative, contented relationships could exist, where so often the opposite exists. My personal experience and the anecdotal things that I've heard from others is that many times therapists are taught this is the way to do therapy. And if they're at all a fixed state type of neurodivergent, right? You learn the rule never changes, everything must follow the rule, or nobody's happy, right? So some of us are pretty fixed state. For the autistic crew, we're fixed state somewhere, even if we're very flexible in most places. There's some place where it needs to follow the rules. You know, it might be the way we eat, right? If I don't have the things that I appreciate for breakfast, it is a struggle for me, right? I've had to learn that flexibility of mind. If I don't have my breakfast food, it's a challenge. We all have a little bit of that. Some of us have a lot of that. And if we're therapists or we're educators or we're in a position where people are looking to us for advice and help, and we believe there are rules that can be repeated for every individual, regardless of their neurotype, their learning modality, their trauma history, et cetera, right? If we just take people as lumps of matter that can be formed in a particular way if you massage them correctly, right? I think we miss opportunities and we risk making things worse.
Oh,
It took
absolutely.
me quite a while to understand talk therapy is not for me.
Yeah.
It's not that I won't talk about my
that's what
trauma. Yeah, go ahead.
And no, and it's so easy to end up re-traumatizing people. it's one of the things that I've come to care a great deal about. I'm actually planning on teaching a summer course for the local university here about introduction to trauma therapy. So what is the difference between general counseling, talk therapy, and then deeper trauma therapy? What is that? What is psychotherapy? Because there is some misunderstanding even out in and amongst professional therapists about what's included and what makes this work, what makes it go well. And one of the things I realized kind of late in the game was, oh, some of the things I'm taking for granted here are because this is the way I think, and not everyone thinks the way that I think. Okay, I'm ADHD. I think in a very nonlinear way, what I call 4D webby kind of process. I do not think in a straight line. That's not how I roll. And while that presents me some challenges in terms of time and managing time and organizational tasks, sometimes on the back end, I, where it really becomes an advantage for me as a therapist is my ability to pivot, my ability to kind of keep in the back of my head all of the things that I am noticing. And noticing, for example, if someone's not going to be a good candidate for more talk-based therapy, being able to shift and to be much, much more somatic, more body-based. And then I may have someone else come into my office who is very, very much in the front of their head in terms of, they really, they need to articulate, they need to put words to it. I start bringing out art materials and they're going to panic. So I'm a different therapist. In fact, I've actually had in Western New York, it's a small community, a lot of people know me, and they think they know me. So then they'll describe something. I'll have past clients who will meet each other, and oh, I know her. And they're a little surprised. It's like I'm a totally different therapist. It depends on who is coming to me, what I'm going to pull out and make use of, because the goal is to meet you where you're at and to help you use your best strengths to be able to help you figure this out. You're going to do most of the work, right? My job is to help facilitate that using what's going to work for you best out of what I'm observing and noticing and what you're telling me about yourself. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I need to close my shade. The sun, you can watch it, like
it's starting to come up your chin.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to do that.
So yeah, the idea of, trauma therapy ought to be deeply flexible and meet people where they're at, whether it's respect for neurotype and noticing a person's particular way of processing information, and understanding that there is natural diversity across all humans, even, not necessarily even specifically people who have been clearly diagnosed with a learning difference or a different style of thinking. It's your job as the therapist to pivot, to notice, to be curious, and to not try to stuff a person into your box of ideas. That's not therapy. Therapy is a collaborative process. And when done really well, it means deeply respecting and adjusting and meeting a person from their perspective and their gifts, and then seeing if you can make yourself be a good fit. And sometimes you're just not going to be.
Yeah.
There have been times where my natural personality, the way that I think, the way that I understand things is not a perfect fit for someone. And when I feel like I'm pretty flexible and I can moderate how I do things and shift a lot, but there are occasions where I'm like, you know what? I know the perfect therapist for you. And I want to connect you with this person because I think you're going to do amazing work together, and we might just do okay. You know, and to be able to have the humility that you might not be able to always be someone's cup of tea, to be able to be their person. It's a very, very personal thing, you know, to allow someone into your inner world and to be vulnerable with another human about things that have hurt you. It's a huge ask. So
I
being
think
able to
too,
also sometimes step back.
what you just said, you think about who you may be able to pass them to. And I
Hmm.
think that is exceptionally important.
Hmm.
Um, when I first started my therapy journey, I just looked up trauma therapists online, right? That one says trauma, they're female, I'll give them a try, right?
Yes.
So, and my very first therapist, who advertised being a trauma therapist, I walk into their office. Their building is entirely under construction. Theirs is the only office that's open. It's just, and a lot of us have offices like this, right? It's just a room, right? You walk in the door,
Mhm.
you're there. There's no like hallway office, right? A lot of us have that. But the way the interior was designed was a big desk with therapist facing me and a chair facing the therapist. Therefore, we talked right at the beginning of this, right? We sit in the corner, we sit with our back against the wall. And the trauma therapy was designed where my back was to the door.
Ah,
I'm like, I didn't even want to sit down. I
oh
didn't,
my God.
I like, I'm not a trauma therapist, and I knew the
Okay.
whole room was set up wrong. Like,
Can I tell you how my room is set up so you understand just how much I understand? When you come into my suite, there's first a waiting room with a fish tank and a big bulletin board full of community resources and all kinds of stuff and
nice.
big soft chairs to sit in. And there's a door going out the other side for restrooms that's like shared with the salon on the other side if you want to go through there, but it's closed. So you have this nice small little waiting room. When you come through my big blue door, blue is my favorite color, and into my actual office space, when I greet people, I immediately let them know I'm going to go make myself another cup of coffee or heat this one up. Can I get you something? And while I'm doing that, make yourself at home. You decide where you feel like sitting in my space. There's bean bags on the floor. There's a big square chair that you can put yourself in where you can kind of box yourself into. There is a sofa against one wall. There's a gamer chair, and I have a great big orange yoga ball I honestly end up sitting on a lot of the time. And none of them are mine. It's sort of like you figure out where you feel most comfortable, and I'll come back with beverages. That's how I do it.
I love it. I absolutely love
Yeah.
it. Especially that there are non-traditional spaces. Um,
Hmm.
my choices would be the box chair or the yoga ball, depending on the
Yeah.
day, right? You might have to spend all of therapy with me doing this.
Uh-huh.
Because
Yeah, it took
I'm
me a
gonna
while
have
to
to
realize that
stand
I
through the
can't do that
whole.
to my clients because they're like, I'm gonna make my clients seasick if I bounce on my ball too much.
Yeah, I have a purple yoga ball that I sit on a lot, and I definitely have to be very careful if I'm on camera and on the yoga
Mhm.
ball because I can't help it, right? And so,
It's great sensory input.
or like me. I just play
Mhm.
constantly when I'm on the yoga ball, which is why I have the yoga ball. But
Yeah, great.
it's not good. I can't tolerate watching a lot of movement.
Hmm.
So I understand and I try to catch myself. So most of the time
Yeah,
I'm in my trusty stable chair. Um, but like I
I
noticed a little
honestly
while
end
ago
up
that
on the floor a lot. I do because a lot of times, again, therapy can be scary. It's intimidating. It's a big ask. It's a lot of trust. So positional, this is one of the things when I'm helping other therapists design their spaces, which is something I think is a lot of fun to do, is share with therapists, like, be mindful about how you're designing your spaces. Be mindful about your position and always making sure that someone has access to the door. Like, don't put yourself in between your client and the door unless they're really comfortable with that, or, you know, it's prearranged with you and you've known each other a long time. Like, just make it easy for people to leave if they want to. And then height. So a lot of times I will purposely put myself lower than the person I'm hanging out with. So somebody chooses the beanbag, I may end up on the floor, just sitting on the floor, Indian style, you know, like cross-leggy,
Yeah.
you know, crisscross applesauce, I think is what the kids call it now.
One of the things that the big desk was a problem for was there was no ability for the therapist to know anything below about here.
Yeah,
Right?
missing a
And
ton of
so,
information.
again, this is well before I understood I was neurodivergent, and so I was heavily masked.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't watching my tells
Yeah, yeah.
or how much my nails were going into the palms of my hand, right? Just little things that if you're a
So many
trained
important things.
therapist, you need to see the human, because
Yep.
the human's body is going to give you, not in the traditional sense, especially for us neurodivergent types, right? All of that like
Mm-hmm.
micro expression stuff. Don't do that to me. I'm flat affect. I've learned all this crap, right? And if I have to think too much, I lose my facial expressions because my birth persona was flat affect, right? So my
Yeah.
facial expressions and stuff like that aren't insincere. They're me
Mm-hmm.
learning how to communicate my internal
Mm-hmm.
feelings to external
Yeah.
parties, right? It's
They're
not,
on manual. It's
but
not automatic. It's on manual. You have to think about it.
right, I do. I
And
have to think about it. I have to, so if I have to think about too many other things, this goes away. Or if I'm really interested, it's hilarious if I'm really interested because I tend to
mm-hmm.
be very animated. Um,
Uh-huh.
now when I'm really interested
Uh-huh.
and people stop,
Yeah.
did I say something to make you upset? No, why? You don't look right. Like,
Forgot
oh,
to do all
sorry.
the things.
I stopped regulating my face. I was really interested. And
Yeah, that makes total sense. Uh-huh.
evidently I don't look pleasant when I'm really interested because I forgot my face.
Yeah.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if a therapist is trained in traditional concepts of micro expressions, body language, things like that, they might get really misled by a
Yeah.
neurodivergent, right? So the idea that you look up and right if you're telling the truth and down and left if you're lying, right? I don't know, what kind of eye avoidant are you? Right? Like
Uh-huh.
what's going on? Maybe I have a headache on this side of my face and I'm like, I'm looking down here because that's what I need to do to kind of like avoid the pain.
Mhm.
Like all of this stuff that we're taught is standard across all human beings is ludicrous in my opinion,
Yeah.
because at least for us neurodivergent types, there's nothing standard about us.
No, no, there needs to be a lot more curiosity, a lot less pathologizing things. You know, I just think of it as like it's such a wonderful thing to get to know a person. You know, and if you can just let go of a lot of those expectations and judgments about what's normal. Normal's a setting on my dryer. I don't even know what that is.
Right.
You know, just
I don't know if that's
human beings
anything
are
either.
human beings. I love that saying, don't you? And it's just, they're just humans. And it's sort of like there are birds. How many different kinds of birds are there? You know, nature loves diversity. It's everywhere. Human beings are diverse. You know, when you start adding in a person's family of origin, which is going to be completely different from the therapist, right? With our worldview, our template for what it means to be a person originally comes from how we grew up, how we were raised, the culture we're in. All of these things are frames. We need to be able to like step outside of these frames and just allow ourselves to wonder and notice and be curious, you know, less
Yeah.
judgment, more curiosity. And that's why, you know, and the desk, you mentioning the desk, it just keeps coming back up in my head. I'm like, oh, you know, the big desk, it just says authority. That's not
I felt like I
connection.
was in the principal's office. I really
Yeah.
did. I'm in trouble.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about like polyvagal theory is hanging out with the folks at the Polyvagal Institute, and I love that crowd. I was like, "Oh, my people! I feel like I've met some of my people." And we're talking about felt safety and neuroception. Neuroception meaning like that unconscious awareness that you're accepted, that you're safe, that you're liked, that you belong on an unconscious wavelength. It's just your nervous system and my nervous system having a conversation without our conscious, like language based part of our brain even being involved, even aware. And so that's something that a therapist can skillfully use, can invite by not putting a desk in between yourself and your client, by creating a cozy space, you know, by not insisting that someone be like, you know, 90-degree angles with you, you know. I end up sitting on the floor, you know, side to side, shoulder to shoulder sometimes, especially with a teenager. You know, sometimes eye contact is completely unnecessary to have an excellent, amazing conversation and assistance between two humans. So it's really a matter of flexibility and reduced judgment, more curiosity, and and just that offering up of relationship. Like, hey, I like you. You're invited. I'd love to get to know you. Let's connect. We'll figure it out.
We have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we at least get a little bit of a definition around EMDR. That's
Sure.
a therapy model that is not widely known, but has some really interesting and amazing possibilities and results baked in. So I want to make
Okay.
sure if people have made it this far in the video, they get like the thing that she said in the beginning. Wait,
Yeah,
what kind of
EMDR.
therapist
EMDR,
is that?
you say like not widely known, yet it's one of the most evidence-based trauma therapies out there.
Mm-hmm.
It is backed up. You know, our government gets behind it. Veterans centers, you know, if you go to the VA for services, EMDR therapy is often available. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a mouthful. So we say EMDR. And when people think of eye movements, if they've even heard of EMDR, they often think of like this finger wagging thing that happens where you follow someone's fingers across your eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
So think of it like this is your midline. So we're fairly symmetrical humans, you know, two eyes, two ears, two hands. You split down your middle. And what this back and forth thing, what they talk about the eye movement, it's something called bilateral. So we're moving our attention, our focus from one side of the body to the other side of the body and then back again. And that is an integral piece of EMDR therapy. It's certainly not all of it by any stretch of the imagination. EMDR therapy is not a tool, it's not a procedure, it's a full psychotherapy modality. So it has how they do case conceptualization, how they understand working memory, how we hold trauma memory differently than we hold our regular memories. There's actually a significant difference. And then how we assist people in taking something that was a traumatic memory that rattled us on a very physical level, maybe caused, major reactions and responses, and how we move that memory out into the front and assist ourselves in integrating it into our present day understanding that's kinder and gentler and more useful to us, help our body understand it, and move it back into regular working memory. So that, yeah, it still happened, right? Wasn't great. We've incorporated it into our life narrative now in a way that is productive and helpful, and it no longer damages our calm, right? It no longer interferes in our daily life. And so it's exciting because it's amazing repair work that you can do. EMDR is all about getting the brain and the body back on the same page. Like it is 2024. And our body needs to understand that. And we can't do that by just talking.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Laurie, if somebody's looking for a trauma therapist and they've either never been to therapy or they've had some unfortunate experiences, what are a couple of things to ask? You call somebody new or you email somebody new.
Yeah.
What should we be asking to help us find trauma therapists that will take into consideration our whole humanness while they try to assist us in our journey?
Yeah. It's hard. I do believe in shopping around. I think you need to always remember that these are just service providers. That authority thing, whether it's a medical provider or a mental health professional, they're still service providers. You can walk away. You have a bad feeling. It's okay. Change therapists. Sometimes it's just not a good personality fit. But in terms of skill, if you want to find someone who's skilled, I'm a big fan of going through some of the larger directories like EMDRIA, because in order for someone to become an EMDR therapist through EMDRIA, there's a lot of requirements. It takes a lot of work, time, and money to become certified in EMDR therapy through EMDRIA. So that's one way where you can kind of raise the possibility that someone really is well practiced. They didn't just take a training over a weekend and now they're saying they're a trauma therapist, right? So asking how long someone's been a trauma therapist, what modalities do they subscribe to? Most of the time when you're talking about trauma therapy, there is a deeper connection with the body. So you're going to hear words like EMDR, but you'll also hear somatic experiencing or sensory motor psychotherapy. Some people will talk about dissociation, because anyone who's working with trauma really ought to have some background in dissociation, which is where we kind of disconnect from ourselves, is probably the easiest general description of that. But therapists ought to have some background in that if they're doing trauma therapy. And then just don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. And if you have it like you're not sure, try again. Always be willing to look for your best fit. The places where I see trauma therapy go wrong is where somebody felt like they didn't want to hurt their therapist's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, really, we've been trained to be like, to not take it personally. It doesn't mean that we're perfect or that we won't, but we know that like sometimes we're not going to be someone's cup of tea or the right fit. So we know we're not supposed to take it personally. So it's okay. This isn't quite working for me, or I'm not comfortable with that, or I think I'm looking for something a little different. This should all be completely okay and not a taboo at all in a therapist's office.
Thank
And if
you.
anyone says this is just the way I work, walking away.
I mean, that's great information, right? Like we
Mhm.
talked about earlier, sometimes people need to do things the way they need to do them. And if a
Mhm.
therapist has discovered I can help people that are helped by the way I do things, that's great
Great.
information. If I'm not helped by the way you do things, I don't have to think of you as a bad person or me as a therapy failure, right? I just
Yeah.
take it as information.
Mhm.
Wonderful. We shouldn't work together. I wish you well. And next, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
finding a good fit is important. You know, it's not just about somebody's qualifications or certification or how many years in. There needs to be trust. Remember we said neuroception of safety?
mhm.
Unless you feel safe in that relationship, you're not gonna get a lot of really good quality work done anyway. So it's a for whatever reason, if you can't find a way to connect, to develop that relationship, really like 80% of therapy is relationship, right? So if you don't feel that, it's okay. Walk away. Try again. Find a better fit.
I do think for many of us neurodivergent folks, we can intellectually embrace, walk away, find something else. But especially if we're struggling with trauma, we may be exhausted to the point of,
Yeah.
no, it took everything in me to overcome my executive functioning that prevents me from making phone calls or looking at lists or my pathological demand avoidance. And right, I had too many
Mhm.
mountains to climb just to call this therapist.
Yeah.
Now what? And I think that's one of the things that I would really like therapists to understand
Mhm.
is that even being willing to reach out in the first place can be, depending on the individual, like gigantic victory.
Absolutely.
Um, and so I think that's part of the reason why I just really clued in on you saying you think, and you're like, oh, there's another therapist that I know, right? So I
Yes.
would love therapists to try to get to know one another in an area in
Oh,
a
yeah.
really supportive way. If somebody comes to me that you would suit better, I want to be able to give them a really soft, warm handoff
Yeah.
because you and I know each other. We've discussed our perspectives on therapy. I trust you as a fellow human in this work,
Mhm.
right? And I know that there are professional associations and things like that, but often those are more about prestige and what you can frame and hang on the wall than they are about really getting to know one another as fellow
Yeah.
humans and
I
talking
feel
about.
very I was gonna say, I feel very fortunate to live in Western New York because when you say that, I'm like, yeah, nah. Um, we have in Western New York, we do have like a Western New York trauma collaborative group of like EMDR therapists who are networking together, who have a listserv together, um, who hang out together, who will be like, hey, who else wants to go to this thing in Utah and great train, and like we'll literally like plane tickets and share hotels and get to know each other. And we also do inter referrals. So in that whole system, we've developed a whole system for like, hey, I've got a person where I can't fit on my caseload right now, or I really think they need something different. I'm looking for someone who has these special skills. Who's out there who does that, who takes this insurance, who's in our Western New York area. And we do that for each other. So we get email pop-ups. I'm looking for. And then we can go, I could do that. And we
That's
help each other
wonderful.
out. And these are people that often I've got a face to go with the name because Western New York is a small place. I do wish it was more like that in more places. Um, and I just got a message the other day that our little EMDR Western New York network is going to combine with the Psychological Association of Western New York, which is like more psychologists, whereas the EMDR network is probably more predominantly social workers, and combine some of our resources to network and really not about prestige, about collaboration. How do we support each other? How do we make sure that we're improving overall best practices in care? And how do we get referrals that are a good fit? Because unfortunately, we are in a time where there still is pretty much a shortage. We need more providers. So we're trying to make the best referrals and help each other out the best we can. But yeah, so
That's
it's good to
wonderful.
live with them. I wish it
Uh,
was like that every year.
Last question, because I know we both have to go.
Yeah.
EMDR
Hmm.
sounds like it is best when the therapist and the client can be in the same room together. However, especially with the mental health care shortages that you just mentioned, often there
Yes.
aren't practitioners in a given area.
Hmm.
Can EMDR be effectively done on camera like you and I are right now? Can it be virtual?
Yes. Yeah, it can be. Though I do highly recommend that EMDR therapists who want to do telehealth, EMDR, do get some extra consultation and a little extra training around it, because there are some workarounds in terms of how you go about it. But it can be very effective. It can be done well. It's not my personal preference for my own self because I'm very somatic and I really like to be in the room and to have that felt connection. That's important to me. But I have done EMDR online and had it be effective. During the pandemic, we didn't have much choice.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, we all, one of the positives that came out of the pandemic season was telehealth, that we were all forced to grow and to figure this out. And now there are trainings available. So I would just say that if anyone's looking for EMDR therapy specifically for telehealth, that you ask the provider if they've had extra education on combining EMDR therapy with telehealth. Um, because I do think it's important to have at least a little bit of support to figure out how to do it well.
fantastic advice. Thank you so much. Laurie, this has been
Absolutely.
a privilege and I can't wait to do it again because there's
So
so
much
much I
fun.
want to dig
So
into
many things to talk
here.
about.
I know. Um, so everybody who's watching, stay tuned. Laurie and I will talk again, and possibly with others, because there are more. I'm meeting therapists from all over the world who share the perspective that the human being needs to be considered before anything else, and because that's such
Absolutely.
a passion of mine that I get that message out into the world. I'm always looking for people who think that way. Um, so yeah, stay tuned. I know Laurie will be back, but thank you, Laurie. I appreciate your time and your perspective so much.
Absolutely. It was a total pleasure. Enjoyed being here, and I hope that we'll do it again sometime soon.